cli-fi novel, The Idiot's Garden. This experimental novel tells a story of a far future Earth recovering from climate disaster and the few humans who remain. A question and answer session will follow the reading, along with an opportunity to purchase a book. I welcome to Ann Arbor District Library tonight, Kyle E. Miller.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm going to read just going to start off here, I'm going to read the sort of like prologue, not technically a prologue, but, and then we're going to I'll talk about it a little bit, and then I'll read some more. Horsetail grew in thickets along the banks of the river. Far upstream, someone boiled the stems, dried them, flattened them into sandpaper, and put the finish on a rocking chair. Downstream, an elk drank from the river and spit out a veneer pin. And here, nourished by the river, the horsetail grew tall, 3 or 4 times the height of the boy now crouched between stems as thick as his neck. He was playing hide-and-seek with his cat, and it was his turn to hide. He tried to keep still and quiet by concentrating on the power lines that hung above his head, 4 black lines against a leaden sky. They were still, the horsetail was still, the clouds too. There was no wind. The boy heard nothing but an ambient hum, the sound made by wings in the flight to silence, as silent as the jungle would allow. 4 parallel lines and everything still, silent, unhurried, and vastly unknown to him. And then the lines waved slightly, as if in a breeze, breaking his focus. He looked down. The hair on his arms stood on end, but there was still no wind. He heard a sound like a drop of water in a well as the power lines began to shudder, and some force gently lifted the hair on his head. A coppery tang filled his mouth, and he looked up again. The lines were at rest. He had just enough time to wonder what was coming before he found out. The power lines leaped violently, snapping themselves free from the poles, and the boy tried to call his cat's name as the thicket of horsetail bent sideways under the foot of a whale. The boy felt the wind displaced by the foot against his cheek. He looked up. 4 slack lines hung from the whale's mouth. She swallowed and took another bite, stripping the nearest pole of wire before moving to the next, her tail held rigid for balance. The boy began to cry at her immensity, this dark blue wall advancing. He couldn't move, couldn't cover his ears as she cried out, either to him or a distant mate, or all the things standing in her way, a call fractured in time, all the more unbearable because so much of the sound hung below the surface of human hearing, the full melody buried, even as the fragment available to the boy's senses was enough to ring his ears through the next morning. She walked on, slowly. The boy wiped his nose. It was terrifying to be born a thing that could change its mind. So that's the prologue. And as stated, The Idiot's Garden is a cli-fi novel. If you don't know what that means, it's typically a speculative fiction, science fiction novel about climate change, climate disaster, environmental issues, and things like that. So this is, I would call this a post-apocalyptic book, but it's like set so far in the future that the apocalypse is kind of long past, and the Earth has started to revitalize itself. So there's a very verdant jungle that has taken over the Earth. Non-human nature has bounced back, and there are very few humans left in the world. And some of the characters that you might think are human may actually not be human. And part of the fun, I think, of the book is to kind of try to puzzle that out. I think at its heart, it's really an adventure story, kind of a quest narrative. It might not seem that way when you read it because it's quite strange, and the prose is very, it can be very Byzantine, it's very ornate. I like to think of it as being overgrown, like the jungle itself is overgrown. And the next couple parts I read, you will get some of that, the flavor of the prose. The prologue is actually kind of, has more restraint than a lot of the other parts. One of the impetuses of writing it in the first place was to explore a lot of sort of dichotomies, I guess. I was thinking about like poetry versus fiction, verse versus prose, and things like that. But there were also other ideas in there, like thinking of sort of like the way we talk about nature. We split it sort of, we talk about nature as if we're not part of it. So there's like the non-human nature out there, and then there's the human stuff, right? So there's that strange split there. There's also a lot about like organicism versus mechanism. If we imbue everything with some sense of life in like a panpsychist way, some sense of life or mind, then how are things different? What explains the difference between things? Are our categories that we make, such as, this is an object and this is a human, this thing is not alive, this is alive, are those arbitrary categories, or is there something to them? And if there's nothing to them and they're arbitrary and everything is one, then what can explain the fact that there are very clearly many things in the world and they're very different? So I love this idea, or I'm kind of obsessed with this idea of the one versus the many, and how do we resolve that tension? I don't necessarily resolve it in the book. I'm just sort of asking those questions. So I'm going to read, I guess I'll explain a little bit about the characters. So there's four main characters, three main protagonists. One is a young boy named Seed. He later becomes, his name changes and he becomes Cepheid. There's Bike, who is I'll explain in a second. There's Bike and then there's Peloria, and they're all very different beings. So I'm going to read a section about Cepheid. He essentially, he has this like strange illness, and he becomes healed by eating a fish that's full of forever chemicals. And there's this strange reaction in him where the forever chemicals cure him of whatever illness that was there. So you can see that I'm already kind of playing with our assumptions and our ideas of what is natural. So I'm going to read the very first part of the first chapter. This is right after Seed becomes healed. Cepheid opened the front door of the dorm and cast off the shadow of his sickbed into air and light and retreating thunder. "I've missed everything that's ever happened," he said, and dipped his hands in the sunlight and rubbed them together as if he were washing them, just as the wet season had rinsed the jungle clear. The dry season had begun. The snapdragons were blooming, and the last storm had blown to the other side of the planet, the mythical dark side only imagined as a mass of islands or an orchard of infinite acres. And Cepheid felt so heightened and vigorous he could sense every eye around, catch a word or two from everyone. I snapdragon, I gravel, I shoe, I lace, I humidity, I palm tree, I alocasia, I sky, I cloud, and even the I white of it, and the I fluffy, and I bird, I wing, I feather, I worm, I space, and I time. And through them he was able to see himself as they saw him. Snapdragon put you in a vase, palm tree climbed you to the top, feather hung you in a dream catcher. He stretched his limbs in the soapy light, these flowers and pinions scrubbing him clean of the exoskeleton of ideas and grammars that accumulate around all eyes shut inside for too long. He was loose and vagabond again. The future was a path that watched his feet. "Gotta catch up on everything," he said, dancing in a circle, leaping to test his new energy, slapping his thighs where a few mosquitoes now landed. The vibration made by his hand as it slapped his thigh transferred from his skin to the mosquitoes, passing from hand to thigh to proboscis to wing, scattering them in confusion as their wing beats followed an unexpected tempo. They pursued him as he ran out of Grand Chef into the jungle toward the clock tower, his attention gathered in the room behind the scarred bronze face, its hands torn down by Peppervine some time before he had been born. On the way, some things revealed themselves to him while others retracted, hiding their faces, burying their arms. They had changed since he was last in the jungle. He didn't recognize the stream, which had rusted over, its surface now condensed into glassy orange plates that could support the weight of a rhinoceros. Cepheid pressed his ear to the overlapping plates and heard the water still babbling underneath, urging him on toward the clock tower like every wasp and zephyr. As he passed through the jungle-eaten city, the lost beacon of a city and only the latest, cities of thatch and steel stratified into the earth's crust, and dropped down the rim of a rock pool, he felt a great mass of things mounting behind him. The pressure built with every flying mantis and bent I-beam he put behind him until the force of their numbers broke the moment and flooded him, each thing pursuing itself and him with a starved and righteous urgency, as if the clock tower and its treasure were at risk from a great nothingness that might burn it in black fire, and only he and everything else could save it. Cepheid, the bearer of a great somethingness. He was in the majority, and yet nothing could easily bear the weight of infinity. Beyond the rock pool, the path to the clock tower opened in Cephid's memory. Through the concrete tunnel and the bamboo grove, beyond the asphalt knoll where he had once been stung by a cloud of bees. The clock tower was more a home to him than Gronchev. Its cracked walnut door emerged from the violent green walls of the jungle, long awaited, a loaf of warm bread from the oven. He hurried up the stairs, careful on the broken steps, into the Caroline room, where Nameless is his companion and cat. Cat that was mentioned in the prologue as well. Where Nameless was already curled in his favorite spot, where the sunlight that entered the round, stained glass window above touched down in overlapping shades of violet. He pinned his ears back, silently aware of the boy's movements, unwilling to get up on anyone's time other than his own. And yet if a hickory beam had fallen from the cracked ceiling, or an arrow had been shot through the broken window, Nameless would have moved to warn the boy of danger. Seth had pressed his lips to the cat's forehead and breathed in his dry season smell, like dead leaves crushed between fingers, baked sand, wood shavings at the bottom of an oak barrel. Seth had picked up a plastic dreidel he had never seen before. "You've changed," he said. He set the dreidel spinning on an obsidian table that had been there from the beginning, from his discovery of the clock tower on a cool, burnished day that hadn't contained enough time. He had gone searching for more. But most of the machinery that had once made the clock itself function was torn out, looted, rusted, or frayed, and the bells that had once filled the Caroline room were missing entirely, their absence allowing more light into the room, more light by which to see the tower's secret wealth, the collection. Even after the intricate fevers of his illness, Seth had remembered where everything was. His favorite book lay where he had left it on a plush chair with a studded leather back. It was written in an alphabet unknown to him, but he loved the woodcut decorations printed at the beginning of each chapter. Little men and women dancing and fighting with elaborate pole arms, standing next to structures he couldn't identify, towers with rectangular arms and houses with teeth. He drew his name in the dust on the cover, lingering on the F. The book lay on the chair on top of a petroglyph of Mishipeshu, the great lynx, that rested on the tail of a stuffed python, its full body buried under the collection. An ostrich egg dipped in gold, a rhinoceros horn, a milk-white bottle-marked Avon, a life-sized grapevine made of brass and precious stones, a Phillips head screwdriver, a mechanical sundial, a first edition of Kenneth Graham's The Wind in the Willows, a 1:350 scale model of the HMS Dreadnought, a pack of unchewed bubblegum, the tooth of a Smilodon, a Super Famicom, the head of John the Baptist, a giant wing sewn from sparrow's wings, a styrofoam cup, a petrified hand, a reliquary containing a lock of saints' red hair, a barrel in the shape of a typewriter, an abacus, a rug of dried club moss, a Roman trephine, 3 sheets of banana paper, and a Smith Corona home computer. The objects offered themselves to Seth's imagination. All of them had by now entered and exited his dreams, and though the things in visible histories were unrecorded, and to him they were like the yarn and fishing line birds sometimes used to build their nests, their stories still moved beneath the surface and imbued the things themselves with perceptible weight. The city dreamed the clock tower, and the tower had dreamed these things. I'm going to pause there. You're probably already stuffed with prose. So you get some sense of the character of the writing here, which is very, as I said, ornate, Baroque. It's kind of like illuminated. It's almost painted. Some of my inspirations were illuminated medieval manuscripts. So I almost thought of the writing sometimes as like actual painted or illuminated on the page. So Cepheid, he was Seed when he was sick. He becomes Cepheid once he's cured. And he's very excited, of course, to go out and explore the jungle again because he had been bedridden for a very long time. Seed, Cepheid, I don't know if you can tell from that short of an excerpt, but he's kind of naive. He's sort of empty-minded. He is the idiot in the title, or one of them. The other idiot in the title is actually the Earth. But if you read it, you can figure that out. So he's kind of this, he's kind of this mindless. There's a bit of Taoism in him. He's kind of this mindless idiot who doesn't really think a whole lot, but actually ends up being quite effective in what he does anyway, and brings richness and good things to the world. So the other two of his companions. So Bike is. I think I'm going to read a section about Bike. He's probably my favorite character. He is arguably. He may be human, he may not be human. He certainly looks like a human, sort of acts like one, but he is very, very old. He's lived many, many lifetimes. And his struggle is sort of fighting back memories. He's lived so much that he's become kind of, his mind is sort of fraught with all of the memories and things that imagine living many, many lifetimes, right? One often seems to be quite enough, but imagine that, multiplied hundreds or thousands of times. So throughout the book, he has these memories that he doesn't have a whole lot of control over them. They almost break off the bottom, the bedrock of his unconscious and rise to the surface. He's kind of like trying to sort through these and sort through time. So he's very old, maybe human. I won't tell you how old he is. He also has a secret identity that I will never reveal. Hopefully somebody figures it out one day. And I think a lot of this book, is about the world building and trying to kind of puzzle out what exactly is going on. And I wanted it to be just familiar enough to where you're like, okay, I'm kind of getting it, but also just alien enough to where you're like, I have no idea what's going on. And I think that's a lot of the fun of it. So, let's see. I think I'm going to read a chapter. This is later in the book. It's a chapter about Bike from his perspective. Each of the characters gets their own chapters. So this is late. It's a little bit of a spoiler, I guess, but probably won't know what's going on anyway. It'll be fun to read it again. So Bike eventually gets trapped in a water tower that is full of water. He gets suspended in it. Doesn't really matter how. So I'm going to read this. Might jump around a little bit, but this will give you a different sense of some of the writing is a bit different. Sephet's chapters are kind of had the different character than the rest of it. The water tower sensed it was pregnant again. Everything turned toward roundness, the dome of sky, the globe of earth, curvatures meeting at a compass point, concentrated around itself. A god inscribed a circle of interiority upon the land, and the land rejoiced. The water tower felt the seed of humanity inside. She imagined its future. Joy, sorrow, temptation, reconciliation, regret, friendship, loneliness, solitude, peace, resolution, hilarity, epiphany, incompletion, weightlessness. The colors of the dreams were many. Human dreams, treasure discovered deep in the jungle, a city of gold, true love, life free of involuntary labor, sirens, heroes, a world without dragons, some tawdry, some sublime. None of these dreams would come true, but others would. The water tower transferred strength to her steel, stability to her legs. The body-centered cubic lattice of her tissues gathered itself. She had been built in pieces that couldn't speak to each other. She stored the lonely days of her motherhood in a cold room below the concrete. But she would bring this creature to term, however long it took to convince the egg seed that it was a throbbing organ of choice. And that, of course, is referring to Bike, who is inside the water tower. The water was getting hot. Bike floated dreamily inside the water sphere, preserved from both drowning and the phenomenal world. His orifices sealed, and yet his consciousness persisted at a low hum, awareness dim and muffled but present, forced to stew in worry and memory. In the water, in water. He might have thought it another way, as agua or why or amanzi, but they were dead, all of them, inert words with no power to move a tongue in this world. So much had been lost. Did it matter to him? He was the only one who could remember them, often in fragments now, the broken chain of a sentence. He should have written more down. Extinctions. He lost a piece of the tapestry and could no longer reconstruct the whole. How language had evolved from symbolic babbling to the construction of an I and on toward complex poetry and mathematics, and maybe back to babbling again, back to give orange, me give eat orange, me eat orange, give me eat orange, give me you, and on toward the proliferation of tribal languages, and then just a few spoken by many. And now he felt they were on the cusp of some kind of transition, which by its nature couldn't be explained in language, not by conscious design or human tinkering. It wasn't political, it wasn't doublespeak, just motion. The way cells that allowed a beast to walk on four legs had once transformed into cells to speak. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead. So he starts ruminating some more, and then the water gets hotter. he's talking about, okay. There was too much information, a mountain of data, most of it incorrect, but people in the past became dependent on it. They worshipped the mountain, fed on it, built their homes in it, loved it and hated it, and saw within it entire cosmoses that chose to enter and exit at will. And it would never go away. There were no inventions. The future was an opaque box you pulled things from. They had built computers that could extract information from a black hole. So maybe it could all be replicated again. Polio and Spanish and agriculture in the year 1992. Had Aquinas said that God could or could not unmake what once existed. Not a single particle, no matter how insignificant, could break away and be erased from the record. And yet sometimes it felt as if nothing really belonged to the time that espoused it. That was the tragedy, the feeling of having been abstracted from the continuum despite the impossibility of it. Your existence presupposed ancestry, the whole aboriginal void or accident or moment of decision, and yet you were alone. Bike had excreted his own culture and now lived in it, delighting in the knowledge of his own song and not unwilling to communicate it but unable, paralyzed by difference, even as it accreted everywhere around lightning bolts and sacred vestments, mud huts and toenail clippers, acting not as the glue but as the acid that moves and releases. A chunk of algae broke off the inside of the sphere and collided with Bike's back, adhering to the skin above his shoulder blades for a second before drifting toward the complicated geometry at the sphere's bottom. And the second they touched, he thought of the day he was born. A day no less lonely for all the village crowded around, because to them he was but the shadow of an osprey, diffused by the texture of grass. He shared his birthday with the first human born from its primate mother, the twin thrown out the window, and a light bloomed on the other side of pain, that dark wall of tortured bodies constituted by stillborns, unfertilized eggs, infants crawling from the ears of cockroaches, bald men's heads dangling from a shaman's belt, frostbitten sailors, burned eyelashes, drilled teeth, awful chaff, and the meadow-sweet flowers of Pladiath. Distant things, and yet pain attaches you to the world's body. His pain was followed by a rush of water and a love for water, for its ability to fill a container without committing to its shape. And then a cry of doubt or terror, and not his own. The mother had died in childbirth, and her sister's brother wailed, while Bike crawled through the grass, selecting out of the many one blade on which to whet his attention. And that woman's water was still running today, running out of the world's cavity, emptying, with a flourish of scattered light. And I'll stop there. You can be on the edge of your seat about whether Bike escapes the water tower or not. So you see there's some of the themes that I'm getting at, and it's not it might seem maybe like a didactic or overly philosophical book, but I'm just asking questions with it, I think. No answers are really provided. And that's because I don't have any. You heard some stuff about evolution in there. Originally, it wasn't really planned, but the book slowly became more and more about my vaguely mystical theories of evolution. And a lot of that is biological evolution, but it also covers cultural, social evolution, evolution of languages, and things like that. So all types of evolution, you can almost read it as like a treatise on evolution. And I don't think it contradicts science, we'll say. Complements it, maybe. How are we doing on time? I can't really see.
It's
6:30,
6:30.
okay. So the third main protagonist, her name is Peloria, and she's definitely not human. That's pretty clear from the start. Peloria is some kind of hybrid creature. She's very... A lot of her traits, or a lot of her characteristics, her appearance are quite human, but she's clearly not human. She has her main difference is that she has two language centers. Humans, we only have one. That limits us. She has two. One of them, she can speak, or she can basically think like a human does. So when you're reading her thoughts, you can understand them. But she can only speak in a very, essentially a unique language that other people generally don't understand. So I'm going to read a little bit about her. Let me see if I can. Let's see. I'm going to read about when her and Bike. Okay. So the he that I'm about to refer to is Bike. On his side of the line, he bent down to shut a dead macaw's eyes. Red and blue feathers broken in the mud, a scaly foot still clutching a plant stem. It had been shot with an arrow fletched with green macaw feathers. On her side, Peloria's side, she watched carefully and waited. He stood back up, imposing and a little imperious in his army green peacoat. A worn brass medal hung from the lapel, on which the gloom of dawn caught a face in profile. Geophagy has granted them new forms, he said, nodding at the macaw. They didn't always look this way. Something in the mud. And that was all it took. A few words, and Peloria sensed that the energy latent in all things and in all moments had already spent itself in him. He had exploded. Everything had already happened in him, and that meant something different to her than it did to him. Identity queried, she said. He preceded her, complemented or supplemented or amplified something absent in her. She was only guessing, but it was something like that, halfway between a feeling and a thought. In the still dim light, she studied what she could see of his face. He was interesting. And when was the last time she had met someone like that? I'm Bike, who are you? She said nothing. Your sixth fingers could fool a surveillance system into writing you off as a product of artificial intelligence, Bike says. He smirked. Or something. Peloria kept her fingers from moving by force of will. No one had ever made that observation before. He had some quality of being able to see through, which annoyed her and made him even more interesting. She saw herself following him through the jungle, his head ducking under the lianas where she would have cut them down. She saw a mountain stained lilac by distance. What are you doing here? Bike asked. Default threat assessment. He understood her when she spoke. She wouldn't have to explain that she had two language centers and could think with both but only speak with one. She wouldn't have to explain that she was wandering with a purpose, fulfilling what she thought of as her purpose anyway, directing her energy outward, seeking. Her last hunt had ended poorly, the quarry having killed itself shortly before she had arrived on the moor. She had found a huge wolf trapped between the pieces of a man's silver armor, strangled by the gorget. The night died during an attempt at freedom, releasing her from the hunt. Her senses then opened their attention to the entire world rather than a single preordained target, and the shock of it made her dizzy. Who had assigned that hunt, and for what reason? She waited for another target, waited, killed time, wandered, and watched her attention diffuse until it was distributed equally at all points. She was on standby, and might remain so for the rest of her life. She saw plenty of conflict as she walked, 2 rhinoceroses battling, a whale hunter who left the bodies behind to decay, lone bandits, starvelings. She could have intervened, but in each instance she didn't know who to help. There were always 2 sides or more, the stag or the starveling, the hunter or the whale, the small rhinoceros or the large one, or the jungle that could strangle them both and feed on their flesh. Something was missing from her directives, and when she thought of the past, searching for the time when they must have been implanted in her by nature and the myriad particulars of her environment, she felt almost nothing, and saw only an antiseptic blue light falling on a rough topography of platinum or electrum shapes, anonymous and terminal. Standby proceeding, she said, hemorrhage of initial will. That can change today, Bike said. I leave the invitation open, truly. I have a group settled in an old college. We could use some security and a huntress, help with food. They would practically worship her, the shadow of some goddess, a reverberation, swift destruction, and then, with a little salt, oil, and heat, the creation that filled the void. Humans tended to give her the wrong kind of attention, fascination laced with suspicion, the same kind of attention they might force upon a bleeding rock or a singing oak. They were worse than birds, worse than monkeys, constantly moving about, making noise, doing, like hammers and nails, noises and doings. She was more interested in quieter things, like ferns, or basalt, or candles, things that demanded less attention. Humans were needy. They spent their lives complaining about each other, and yet were completely dedicated to their own gregariousness. Relations were primary. Talent, skill, intelligence, passion, finesse. None of it mattered if you knew someone. She had been passed over before. She had been ignored, despised. They selected someone else because they were more familiar, or they couldn't tolerate Peloria's language, or her affect made them uncomfortable. Even as these qualities spoke of her, hinted at the inside of appearances, they were ignorant, unable to open their solitary language centers to the possibility of a new category. They yearned for likeness, the mirror that is no mirror, the self that is the other. Her only consolation was that she could walk through the jungle for 10 days straight without running into one. I wanted to give more of an idea of what her language sounds like, but she doesn't speak a whole lot. As you can see, this is sort of one of her preoccupations, that she doesn't like humans very much. And one of the reasons is because they often feel that she's a threat, or they kind of marginalize her. And a lot of this book is kind of circling around the idea of the marginalization of hybrids. So I think I mentioned those strict categories earlier. As humans, we don't like things, we tend to dislike things that cross those categories, that survive outside of dichotomies, and we often marginalize them. You could think of plenty of examples. I would actually say artificial intelligence is one, regardless of how you feel about it currently. It's right on that weird line of like, okay, is it intelligence? Is it natural? Is it a machine, right? And those things tend to get sort of have that uncanny effect. So Peloria is a hybrid. She's somewhere between human and machine. I wouldn't call her an android or a robot, but that's kind of what her struggle is finding out what she is, because she doesn't know. No one was there to tell her. She has no parents or builders or whatever. I think one of the hopes I have with this book is that it sort of destroys your categorical thinking. It knocks those barriers down and allows you to see that those are arbitrary. One of my favorite authors, Gene Wolfe, once wrote that all dichotomies are false. And I think that's true. I have yet to find one that isn't. Even life and death, something we hold to be very easily definable, isn't on second thought. The example would be viruses. Are they alive or not? We don't. It seems to be somewhat in between, or even DNA. I mentioned the world building. There are also these other sort of interstitial chapters. They're sort of like side stories. It's sort of like news from around the world. To give you a better idea of what's going on and to help you piece it together, or maybe confuse you even further. So just sort of like little short stories in between the main narrative. And these run from the first one is about a golem that's made of red mud from basically from a chemical spill. The mud has turned red, so it's about a golem. Another one is about a woman who has sensuous relationships with snakes. Another one is about a blind woman. She was born blind, but she can see through plants. So she can use all the plants in the world essentially as her eyes. And let me see here. I'm going to maybe read an excerpt from one. They tend to be complicated. The whole thing is too complicated. Like everything I write, there's too much in it. But that was also kind of the point. As you probably can gather, a lot of the sentences are very long. There's just a lot going on in them, and that's part of the world building, to be honest. It's all like world building through language, not just what is the content, what we might call content, but the actual style is part of that world building. I'll read a part of the Red Golem one. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just to get another idea of some of the prose. So this one's just called Red Golem. Oh, his creator had granted him the strength of mountains, if only he knew what to do with it. Once he had thrown the marble statue of some human hero of independence over a tower in the jungle, and a pair of golden eagles flew from the place where it had landed. He took it for granted that it was his body that was meant to be used rather than his mind. He was a slow thinker, perfectly capable of forming sentences and adding simple numbers, but it took him much longer than he expected it would. He could dimly recall an hourglass overturned 6 times on a cluttered desk as he calculated the sum of 4 and 5 sometime in his youth. He had few memories of his maker, Rabbi Wassertrum, aside from his name and the fluted sound of his voice, and none at all of the precepts and laws that provided for his animation, the subtle morphological energies and incantations that underlay life, truth, and death. More frequently, he had visions of a Bozite mine, and always the same human men dying there, falling spontaneously to the ground, clutching their chests, or crushed under the hand of one of their own machines. He wondered if he had been created for something similar. He could crush a man's bones without effort, but he couldn't be sure. He couldn't triangulate the relationship between the rabbi, the mine, and himself, how it all fit together or didn't. He asked himself if he felt like killing. The only answer was the taste of iron in his mouth. He envied the mining machines from his visions. They already knew what to do with themselves and didn't have to worry about where to go. There must be comfort in knowing your role, he thought, even if it was small and inflexible and nearly eternal. Maybe he was vestigial. His purpose was extinct. He was the wandering residue of an obsolete process. Or maybe he was actually premature, the first of his kind, and he had been invented to solve a problem that didn't exist yet, but soon would. He walked into a village wrecked by fire. The buildings had been made of wood, paper, fabric, flammable materials, poorly put together. The humans had been in a rush, or unskilled, or had never meant to stay for long. Lightning struck, or a peat lamp fell from an unfinished shelf, and the village was over. But if they hadn't intended to stay, why dig a well and stack such beautifully red bricks around it in a hexagon? Standing in the center of the village, the well alone was untouched by fire. And I'll stop there and let you figure out what happens to the red golem. And I think some of these, are you have to kind of wonder if they're actually happening. Are they fantasies? Are they parables? And all this stuff is kind of working together. I want to go back a second to last thing I want to say. When I read Peloria's section, the beginning of that says, on Bike's side of the line, he bent down to shut a dead macaw's eyes. Red and blue feathers broken in the mud, a scaly foot. It had been shot with an arrow, fletched with green macaw feathers. And then he says, geophagy, that's the eating of rocks and minerals, which macaws actually do, has granted them new forms. They didn't always look this way, something in the mud. So remember that Cepheid was cured by eating forever chemicals. So there's this idea of like everything being kind of contaminated by something, which we get, you get into ideas of purity and things like that. But something in the mud. So the macaws didn't always look this way. So the macaw has changed, right? We don't know in the book, they're never described any more than that. So we don't know what the macaws actually look like. But the word that's used to describe and name that thing is still macaw. So if a macaw can be a macaw but look completely different, what other words in here might be unreliable, right? And so a big part of it is about that. There's a horse later, and the horse is described as having a horn, right? But it's still called a horse. And that's meant to kind of unsettle you and kind of pull the rug out under your legs. Because if those things can look different from what we think they are based on the signifier, what other words might be unreliable as well. So I think I'm going to stop there and start and take some questions. We have a microphone to help the people watching on streaming here. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay.
Thank you so much for your bravery in writing a book.
Thank you.
You are very accomplished, and I have a question.
Sure.
Please. Are you holding the male responsible for earthly posterity in the event of nuclear war? Is that what you're saying?
Am I holding the men?
Yes. It sounds to me like you are, but then I get confused when I look at the picture. And I look at the picture and I see you being a target. So maybe women don't like for you to be responsible. Maybe women want to be responsible. So it's a one gender.
I think the responsibility, I don't know that the book would answer that question, but the responsibility belongs to everyone, not just men. Yeah.
That's fair. Now how will you carry that forward? How will you carry that forward that everyone's responsible?
Oh, I don't know. That's beyond the scope here, I think.
You have to write a sequel. You have to write a sequel.
But I think it's clear when you read the book that it's sort of age-gendered. It's not really a consideration here.
Other questions?
This was awesome, and you should make an audiobook because it was really nice to hear you read it.
Authors are infamously bad at reading their own work. So
But
I'm
you're
I'm
really
always afraid
good.
that, like, oh God, it sounds terrible.
No, you're really good at reading work. One question I had, just out of curiosity, it like occurred to me recently that one thing that makes the novel awesome as a genre to write is that it's basically like a research project, but very capacious in how you use that research. So I was just curious if you had any, like, I feel like I got tidbits of like research rabbit holes, like the macaw and stuff, but I just wanted to hear more about weird rabbit holes you went into, and yeah, what kind of the research side of this book was, because
Sure,
I don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah, actually, when I started writing, I was looking for a model, like in fiction, a fictional model, and I couldn't find one, so I just started reading a bunch of nonfiction, which often, like, I find really inspiring. And I think that's where a lot of the evolution ideas came from, because I was reading some stuff about that. There was a book, don't remember what it was called, like maybe the four ways of evolution or something. It was five. It was an amazing book about kind of a rebuttal of the sort of gene-centered view of evolution. It was fantastic, and that provided a lot. So that was a bit of a rabbit hole. It's also reading on it's actually not in the original version, but like as I was rewriting it later, because I rewrote this about 2 times completely, I was reading a lot of Alfred Whitehead, who's a philosopher, a process philosopher, and so his ideas started to kind of come in there, which also ties into evolution, that process of evolution. And in fact, so far he has the best answer to the problem of the one versus the many. I'm not going to try to explain it because that would make me look like an idiot. But if you want to know, dive into his stuff. That he really he treats that problem the best that I've seen it. So that was another one. The macaw thing I actually learned when I was I used to work with animals at the Creature Conservancy. So that's where I learned about the macaws. They do practice geophagy. Those are like the 2 main ones. It's also, I was reading some like post-human theory at the time, and some of that kind of fell in there as well. I think what else. Yeah, that comes to mind.
Anybody else?
Oh, actually, the other big thing that I was into was like natural wonders and how they've been viewed from like medieval times and onward. Read another wonderful book that I can't think of right now. I'll give you the bibliography later, but essentially about like even like the emotion of wonder and like how that has changed over history. It was really interesting. I think like during like Francis Bacon's time, like early natural history, there were times when like wonder was like a taboo feeling, whether it like distracted you from more Christian worship, or just it would distract you from other things. Like it's really interesting, but that kind of tied in with the medieval illuminated manuscripts. And that's sort of like the marginalization of hybrids, which actually, they were marginalized literally in a lot of manuscripts. If you had something that didn't fit in the categories, maybe it was a bird that was born from barnacles or something. There's like a barnacle goose, I think. It's like, is this is it maybe a mineral? Is it a bird? What is it? And sometimes those things would literally, they wouldn't know where else to put them, so they'd put them in the margin. So that got me thinking about things as well.
Other questions?
Yeah, this was a really fun reading. Thank you. It also sounds to me, I'm hearing you talk about like process philosophy and like how we think about things as things. It also sounds like you're doing a lot of language philosophy in the book, like hearing you talk about the moment when Seed like writes his name on a book on the page, or like the title, The Idiot's Garden. You know, the idiot being someone who can't talk to people. I guess I'm just curious, similar to Maya's question, how are you thinking about language as genre? I don't know, just talk about language.
Yeah, there is quite a bit. In fact, there's one of those interstitial chapters later on where this physician character is like arguing with another character about basically like about what language is or what it does. And actually, my publisher asked a similar question. He was like, "Oh, this must be like this must be central to the book." And I was like, "Actually, not really." So a lot of that is just sort of incidental, or I'm just kind of playing around. But a lot of it's almost like a red herring. I wouldn't say that the book is about language, except maybe the evolution of language. I am interested in that and how, in that one section, Bike was kind of musing about, okay, all of these languages are dying out. What does that mean? What does, and those sorts of things. And that section, if you remember the give me eat orange thing, that's actually, there was a chimpanzee that they taught to use, like, to speak with buttons, essentially. And that is directly ripped from that. That's one of the things that that the chimpanzee said. I do think I'm interested in, I'm just interested in playing with language, I think. It's a game. And I like this game.
Anybody else?
I'm working on it. Actually, I'm not, but we'll see. Not much of a sequel person, but it is tempting to return to the world in some way. I don't think it would. If I do, I don't think it will involve these characters, but I have thought about it. Sure.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So Ann Arbor District Library would like to thank Kyle so much for coming and sharing his book tonight and reading with us. And if anyone would like to purchase a copy and have it signed by Kyle, he'll be here for a few minutes. Good. All right.
Thank you.
Round
Thank
of
you
applause.
all
Thank
for
you.
coming.